Welcome back to Burn the Ship, everybody. Thank you, my friend. I want to let you have the opportunity to introduce yourself, but I appreciate everybody coming back. This is Burn the Ship podcast. Our goal with Burn the Ship podcast is always to connect entrepreneurs with professionals that can help you go all in on your business. So we bring in entrepreneurs that have walked the walk, talked the talk, been through the process of, acquiring, starting, growing, managing, and really experiencing what it's like to own a business. So a new connection of mine. I won't steal your thunder. I'll let you introduce yourself and your company. But I'm excited to have you here. Appreciate you coming out. Go ahead and tell us who you are.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Adrian Pinto. I'm the president of Georgia Scapes, which is a commercial landscaping business based just outside of Atlanta. I acquired the business back in July, and previously actually moved to Atlanta to do this. So I moved here back in February. And so my background actually is in finance. I lived in New York City for 8 years previously, working on Wall Street, doing investment banking and private equity, and ultimately moved with my wife here, like I said, back early in 2021.
Cool. So what kind of led you to the entrepreneur side of things? How did you go from your finance background to I want to own and start my own business?
Yeah, so the private equity firm that I worked for was called Greenbrier Equity Group. So it was an industrials focused fund. And so a lot of the deals that we did there were business services related. And so you would see a lot of these companies such as HVAC or plumbing or components manufacturers, and they were really blue collar businesses. And often they were built through what they call a roll-up strategy. So that's when you buy kind of one initial platform, and then you do a bunch of add-on acquisitions to get to a kind of a scaled business. And so I had worked with a handful of those businesses. I had looked at them for investment purposes. And every time I did so, I just was always really intrigued by the idea, because in a lot of these instances, you either had people that maybe did have backgrounds in that respective industry, like components manufacturing or HVAC, but they started, like I said, with a really small business. Or you even sometimes found businesses where an individual would go out and acquire it, and he previously did nothing related to that industry, which was the case for me. And so like I said, I saw numerous instances where people were able to do this and build pretty sizable businesses. And I just remember thinking in all of those occasions, these guys are no smarter than I am necessarily, right? They just
Sure.
had a huge motivation and a drive to do this. And so I remember just kind of getting this idea that, as opposed to being on the investing side of things and looking at businesses to make investments in, I would rather kind of dive into a business 100% and, operate it. So basically build a business from that perspective as opposed to as the investor.
Sure. So what is kind of the plan for you guys? And you talked a little bit about add-on services to create this kind of scalable solution as far as business goes. What is the plan for you guys? Are you guys going to continue to make some of those small acquisitions, or are you going to kind of play where you're playing right now?
Yeah, so when I was looking for a business, I mean, certainly, there was a couple kind of common themes that I was looking for. It just so happened that I found those in Georgia Scapes, but some of those themes were, really fragmented industry. So not a lot of big companies. There's just a lot of small mom and pop
Sure.
businesses, as well as kind of a growing industry. And so when you have those two elements alongside some other things, it presents a really good M&A opportunity. And so when I found Georgia Scapes, what immediately struck me was here's a great team, great customer relationships, but also a really tangible M&A opportunity. And so in addition to kind of the organic initiatives that we have for growth, which there's plenty, the M&A side of things is really attractive to me. I'd say it's probably even more so now after 5 months in the business than it was when I started, because I've just seen how possible it is.
Yeah.
If you drive on the outskirts of Atlanta, I'm sure up here by your guys' office, but certainly by where I am, if you drive around at lunchtime, you'll see 10 different landscaping companies. And
Sure.
yeah, some of them are a lot bigger than we are, and we couldn't acquire, at least not anytime soon. But there's a ton of mom and pop businesses that present good opportunities out there. So I'm trying to utilize my background in the finance and acquisition side of things to pair that with the strong kind of organic growth
Sure.
that Georgia Scapes has been able to experience, thanks to, the really quality team that we have there.
Sure. Why did you pick Georgia?
Yeah, so I'm from Pennsylvania initially, and then like I said, I moved to New York City after college. My wife is from Texas, and ironically, my whole family moved from Pennsylvania to Atlanta for different reasons. So I got a brother down here, a sister and her family. Then my parents moved up here from Florida, and so when my wife and I were looking to leave New York, Christy's whole, all she cared about really was going to still kind of a large city, but somewhere warmer. And so then when we were trying to kind of narrow that down, Atlanta kind of fit a lot of the boxes that we were looking
Sure.
for. So
Sure. Well, that's solid. And I think that when you talk about kind of the merger and acquisition kind of things, that your business shares a lot of that with my industry as well, because the credit card processing game is all about building a book of business and then selling that book of business for whatever it's valued at, and then
Yep.
taking that money and reinvesting it into a different way to more quickly and more aggressively grow a better book of business. So like
yeah,
the multiplier side of things is something that, especially when you get into, that C level space and the payment space, that you're always looking at your multiplier. You're always looking at what is the valuation of my clients and how can I get
right.
rid of some of this stuff so that I can add some fuel to building a better book of business. So that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, there's a handful of industries out there where essentially every time you get scale, you increase the multiple that your
Sure.
business is worth. And
Right.
so, a small services business might be worth 2 times their EBITDA,
Sure.
but the minute you grow it to, let's say you double the size, all of a sudden now it's worth 4 times, at more scale. And that continues to happen even up into the private equity space. The firm that I used to work for, the businesses we would look at would be 10 times EBITDA. And so that scale benefit, that multiple expansion is something that is, really tangible in services. Sounds like it applies to your
Sure.
business as well, but something that I'm trying to capitalize on certainly.
So what are you guys buying? Are you guys going to buy the guys that are out there cutting 100 yards at a time? They're what is like that
Yeah, so
ideal size that you want to make that acquisition?
Well, so yeah, so I'd say those are two separate questions. So in terms of the type of company that we'd want to buy, you definitely have to be strategic about that, right? Because
Sure.
especially in landscaping, there are a really broad range of types of landscapers. You obviously have kind of your residential services. We don't really do any of that. We are on the commercial side. But then even within commercial, you could have the company that's cutting grass on the side of the highway, lots of yard there, right? But actual grass cutting itself is very low margin, not really great work.
Certainly a race to the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely, and very pricing competitive. And so, the ideal customer, to answer your first question, is someone that pairs kind of high quality maintenance work. So the combination of grass cutting, but leaf blowing, shrub trimming, all of that stuff. But they pair that then with enhancements. So if you think about like a luxury apartment building, right, they're gonna spend to keep their property up throughout the year, but then throughout the year they're also going to spend a lot more on things like seasonal color, flower installation, pine straw. They're gonna look to upgrade their courtyard, the pool area. And so when you have a customer that has that two-pronged approach to spending, it can be much more profitable as a landscaping company. So that, to answer your first question, is like we will definitely look for companies that have the right customers so that we assure ourselves we're growing in the right areas, not just simply trying to add revenue, because that doesn't ultimately help you if the revenue that you add is not attractive, attractive revenue. From a size perspective, I think that really depends. I mean, I certainly, if we try to even, double the size of our business by finding kind of an equal size player, it just complicates the acquisition. It's definitely doable, but it just makes it more involved, right? Because then you have to deal with 2 back office teams and the integration of systems and QuickBooks and the financials is much more complicated. I think a more kind of, easily digestible bite size is somewhere in the, million of revenue, something like that we can kind of take on. You end up getting a couple of crews, maybe an account manager, maybe an estimator, and some equipment, and then their customer relationships. And you can kind of pair that more easily with an existing platform. But that being said, I mean, if we were to find an equal size or even slightly larger business that was, really quality with good systems, good customers, like that would absolutely be very attractive to us, and certainly worth exploring.
Sure. Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I kind of want to transition from there to figuring out what it is that you guys have done or planning to do that's really gonna separate you guys. And I think it's 2 things. I think it is that you spoke earlier about you wanted to dive into one industry and business and understand that and kind of flesh that out to its whole. What has been some of the hardships of learning the new side of this industry? Because taking your skills that you already had in the merger and acquisition as well as financing space, you have an incredible understanding and I would say on average exponentially more understanding of that than other competitors in your industry, kind of depending upon how they got into their industry.
Yeah.
So what does the growing phase look like? What is the getting used to being in this industry that you've never really been into before? And what have been the hardest parts and what have been the easiest parts? And what are things that people that are doing something like that need to look out for?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think first and foremost, not having an understanding of the industry basically when I started, or at least like toward, the last couple weeks prior to the close of the acquisition, I started really kind of trying to, learn about the market and all these things. But ultimately I was, very naive, day one, right? I didn't know a whole lot about actual commercial landscaping. So I'd say first and foremost was just trying to understand, like, okay, what exactly is it we do? What are all these different divisions that we have? What are the services we provide there? Why does a customer choose us versus a competitor? Like those really fundamental things that anyone that has any landscaping experience would have already been ahead of me on. That was really where I spent like the first couple of months, frankly, is just digesting all of that and making
It's
sure.
really your sales process.
Yeah,
Just diving into your sales process.
Yeah,
What makes you guys stand out?
For sure. And I mean, frankly, we didn't really have much of a sales process, but before I could even focus on building one, I needed to understand, like, why would a customer choose us, right? Like,
Yeah.
why should we win? Because if I don't know that, how can I like sell us? You know
Sure.
what I mean? And so that was definitely part of it. And I'm still learning. I mean, I try to go on a lot whenever we get opportunities to quote out new business. I try to attend a lot of those kind of property walkthroughs, so I can witness, one of our account managers or an estimator have a discussion with a property manager, and I can pick up on the things that they're discussing and make sure that I'm on the same page, basically. So that so that disconnect kind of shrinks over time. But
Sure.
So that was definitely the biggest challenge, I would say, is just like purely the operational side of things. I think the other issue is like, when you come from a finance background, one of the challenges is you look at businesses more superficially and from a very high level, right? So I may get 50 pages of material about your company. I'm going to go through those materials. I'm going to, run some numbers, some analysis. I'm going to maybe ask some people that have experience in your industry. But ultimately, like, I'm never going to become an expert, right? I'm always going to have a 10,000-foot view. And so I went from, being in that world for 7 or 8 years to all of a sudden I'm on the ground floor and I'm, immersed in every aspect of it, right?
Sure.
And so I think what I've come to appreciate a lot more is the difficulties with implementing changes and going through some of those growing pains, right?
Sure.
It's really easy from
Your real business owner stuff.
for sure, right?
Yeah,
Because
you're dealing with people now.
right. It's easy from a finance perspective to be like, hey, you guys should go do this and grow 20%. But when you're in the business, I now understand the challenges that actually, what actually it takes to do that. And it's much harder, obviously.
Yeah.
So I think I've had to, definitely had to level set my own kind of expectations or, goals a little bit, right? Because day one, I was so enthusiastic, so motivated. So like, let's go do this, this, and this. And then I've, had to dial that back a little because I've had to become more realistic with,
Sure.
what's possible. And I mean, that being said, I mean, the opportunity set is enormous, but I think we just have to go at it from a much more kind of structured way, as opposed to just like, implementing all these changes day one.
Sure. Did the skills that you already had from a financial side of things, did you expect that I'm going to be able to step in and be a really good business owner day one? Or is that something that you knew you were going to have to kind of do the practicing?
No, 100%. I knew that it was going to be a challenge. I mean, that's why, like, I'd say maybe if not the first, then probably the top 3 things I looked for in a business was a business with an existing team of strong people, right? Because I knew that if I were to buy a company where the owner did everything and there was no one else there, and so then he leaves and I take over and now I'm tasked with doing everything, which that happens, right? A lot of times people acquire those businesses. That wasn't going to be a recipe for success for me. Maybe I could figure it out, but that wasn't going to be how I could best utilize, I think, my skill set.
Was this deal that when you actually did the M&A, was this the owner of the company already was fully exiting?
No, I mean, so he was fully exiting. So I completely bought him out.
So he's no more job, no more hang on for 6 months and help us transition.
He stayed for 4 weeks.
Okay.
And so, but that, and I mean, to be fair, like, he did quite a bit of work for the business.
Sure.
We've had to transition who does some of that work. So some of the things that were more like operational related that he did, we've passed that on to other people. We've also made hires that kind of backfill some of the things that he did.
Good.
But it was always my intention that I'm not going to try to replace him as a landscaping expert, right? Like, that's just not best use of my time. It's not the best use of what I'm good at. And it's also not going to help the business. So I think that, I was pretty well aware that wasn't going to be a recipe for success. And that being said, I mean, I think there's a number of things that my background lends itself pretty well to that our business didn't previously have. And
Sure.
some of that is, I think, on the business development front. So, trying to generate kind of sales pipelines, meet,
Yeah.
new customer relationships.
Adding a lot of structure to the growth side of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of things. I mean, a great analogy that had been said to me once was when you go after these small businesses first and your intention is to ultimately do additional add-ons, your goal should be nothing more than to build a chassis that you can put other businesses on, right? Because if you don't have that, you don't have the structure, as you mentioned, it's going to be impossible to do acquisitions, because when you acquire someone, it's going to be this big mess, right? Of like,
Sure.
what do I do with the process? Like your payroll and my payroll and all that stuff. And so my big focus has been, in addition to kind of developing some business, like a new sales pipeline and all of that, has really just been to kind of streamline processes and kind of, let's say tailor the chassis a little bit, right? By improving our payroll, improving our, our accounting processes, improving time tracking, all of these different things,
Sure.
Has been a big focus.
Sure. So you kind of you got used to wearing that business owner hat pretty quick, kind of forced to learn a lot of those things.
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of value for people that are your competitors in your industry, like other owner operators of commercial landscaping companies? Do you see a value for them to learn some of the skills that you already had as far as M&A goes and as far as finance goes?
I mean,
Is that something you would recommend, I guess
so
I'm asking?
I think that at the size of business that we have, frankly, like, I mean, some of my finance skills, like let's say cash flow forecasting, right? Understanding what our cash flow position is going to look like over the next month. That stuff, I'm pretty good at, and
Sure.
those skills could be relatable to another business. I'm sure they have that, right? I'm sure their controller or accountant or whatever, especially these kind of growing businesses, they have to have someone that can do that stuff. I think unless a business wants to undertake M&A, then they're not going to have anyone that works for them that has a background in that.
Sure.
And I'm not necessarily sure how helpful it would be if you don't want to do it anyway.
For
You
sure.
know what I mean? I think to try to execute a roll-up strategy where you do a bunch of add-ons, you have to have someone that has some M&A background. And so
Yeah.
I think in that instance, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a value add that I have that background. And if someone else wanted to do it, they would probably have to go out and kind of bring someone on.
Did you kind of get into this acquisition with your, because like something my middle school science teacher used to say all the time is begin with the end in mind. So you can cut out a lot of junk in the middle if you begin thinking about where you want to end up. Did you step into this deal knowing, what your forecast for exit is? Or at least, hypothesizing?
I mean, I certainly thought about it, right? Like, what are the options? I mean, and that's something, I mean, that's an interesting way to phrase it. I mean, that is something certainly in the finance world, like in private equity, right? If you think about it, like whenever you do a deal, you're underwriting what you buy it for, but you're also underwriting what you think you could sell it for, right?
Sure.
And that those collectively, that's how you figure out your returns. So, I mean, I didn't think about this as structured as like, I'm going to own it for X number of years and then sell it to this type of person. Which is what you would do in the PE space. I was a little bit more open-ended than that, but like to answer your question, I wouldn't have ever acquired a business if I didn't think that some of those exit optionalities existed.
Sure.
Right. So I've definitely hypothesized who could be a potential, exit, suitor. I could sell it to this type of person or this type of person. Well, what if I didn't want to sell it? What are the other options? I could do this or this. So 100% like that played into it, is wanting to make sure I had some idea of like what the long-term play is.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, the benefit, and frankly, one of the reasons I structured the deal the way I did, which is me owning 100% of the equity, is that gives me much more optionality because I can do whatever I want. So
Sure.
if I decided to sell it, great.
You don't got to ask however many people.
100%. And if you have a bunch of co-investors in your deal, right, especially if
Definitely muddies the water.
Yeah, and a lot of times, people have different objectives, right? So if I go try, a family office, let's say that, let's say you get a loan for a couple $100,000 or something, and they're going to be part of the equity, they're going to have a timeline in their mind where they say, I want to get paid back X amount return in 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that puts a lot of pressure on a business owner, because then it's like, all right, now not only do I need to hit my growth targets, but I also have to figure out a way to exit in 3 to 5 years.
Factor in a certain amount of cash flow to keep the investors happy.
Yeah,
as well.
and so now I don't have to worry about that. I can, in some ways, honestly, it allows me to think a little bit more like a startup, like a kind of a tech startup, where if you think about tech startups, a lot of these guys, they're always long-term plans. So they lose money, just reinvest every dollar that they get back in the business, focus on growth. And then they're always thinking about like the long-term vision. I kind of can do the same, right? Like I don't have to worry about, paying my investors back a certain amount per year out of cash flow, like you said. I don't have to worry about selling the business within 3 to 5 years to pay back, whatever, so equity owners. Like, I can just plan on whatever my goal is. And right now my goal is just growth, and it's,
Sure.
maintaining good customer relationships and growing.
Sure. We do this podcast with a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs that are in, those first couple of years of business. And something that we always talk about as we get done with these podcasts, when we're kind of talking about the people that we just talked to and kind of what the value is there of their connection and what we can do for their business and vice versa, is that we often talk about how emotionally invested a lot of people are in their business. Do you find yourself becoming like, I don't know if you have kids or not, but do you find yourself this business becoming your baby?
So I don't have kids. So I would say that it's funny because I remember like the first couple of weeks, like I couldn't even sleep, right? Because like when you lay down at night, like you're just thinking.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's
There's
like
things to do.
stress related, but you're just like in your mind, you're just constantly building a list of things that I could do. And so now I just keep like an open notepad on my phone, where I'm just like, I'll be driving around and like, oh yeah, I should think about this and like, write it down. So there's definitely some of that where I'm constantly thinking about, things. And I think the other thing is like, this is the first instance from a professional standpoint where I've had people that rely upon me in a way for, I don't want to say their livelihood, but at least for, let's say their paycheck, right? And so in my past roles, however much accountability and responsibility I had, ultimately people weren't getting paid on a week-to-week basis because of decisions that I made or because of even something as simple as me actually processing payroll, right? But like now, I mean, there's so much more additional stress because you do know that like there's a team of X number of people who, they kind of rely on me to make sure that things are working out. And so that, I mean, I think kind of coming to grips with that in the beginning presented a certain amount of stress. I think that I had to kind of, compartmentalize with the decision making, because I think it's always important to remember that. And it's obviously, I think anyone that's a human, like you develop relationships with your employees, you like those people.
Yeah, and a certain level of empathy for people that aren't walking that same life.
Yeah.
For sure.
I mean, like I can't even imagine coming into work and like having to tell employees like, hey, we made a bad decision and like now like it's, we're not going to make payroll or something. Yeah, that would be incredibly challenging. And so I think that would be very tough. But at the same time, I think you do have to compartmentalize the emotional side of things with also just making good business decisions. And so, I think that's, as I mentioned, like one of the reasons that I'm happy I don't have to rely on other people and, investors or whatever is because it's allowing me to just think about the business decision. So whether that means let's go out and buy 3 new trucks, or let's not even think about like profit right now and let's just focus on like every dollar we make, investing it in, growth initiatives. Like I can think about those things less emotionally, I think, because I don't have these other kind of things weighing on me.
Well, that's a big advantage, I think, in business, is that if you can look at it not from an emotional standpoint, because some people lose for years. Some people lose for a really long time or never develop the structure they need to grow their business, or don't ever develop a true sales process, or don't harbor the type of relationships with your customers that makes your business acquirable.
Yeah.
So
well, and I think frankly, one of the beauties behind small business acquisition, and this is, there's a book that I had read when I first kind of got this idea in my mind, which was called Buy Then Build. And it basically, the premise is like, if you look at startups out there, right, there's a very small fraction of startups that exist that ever become profitable, right? Most fail. And then on the flip side, if you look at a small business, most of them are generating some level of cash flow. And so the idea of buying something that already generates cash flow and using that as a way to build something, as opposed to like starting from scratch, it's just like a no-brainer. And so anyway, Dan, to the point you're making, like, the other thing that is a kind of a comforting fact is like I was fortunate enough to find a business like Georgia Scapes that has been really successful for 22 years, has this really long track record, really long customer relationships. And so having that to rely on, in addition to the team members that I can rely on, allows us to, I think, make those kind of longer term growth decisions, and we're not worried on a day-to-day basis like, oh, are we going to able to, are we going to get cash flow this week? Are we going to be able to make payroll? Like, we don't have to think about that because it's a stable business that, I'm fortunate that the founder, had created.
Sure. Well, I think your two biggest advantages really are understanding on a very detailed level what the health of your business looks like is
Yeah.
one thing, is that you can track it back. And even if, whether you're in the red one month or you're in the black one month, is that you can see the decisions you're making profitably, developing your business in the right way for the future, as well as your ability to set emotion to the side with your business and say, how can I look at this, non-emotionally, because this is not my baby. This is a business. This is something that we need to make work, because there's so many people, there's so much human capital invested in what we're doing. There's so many people's lives invested in what's going on here, that you can say, okay, here are the decisions that we need to make to really make this machine continue turning. So I think those are huge advantages, and I think that those are things that our audience probably should bottle up and try to take home with them and kind of replicate. I'm curious myself, are there other verticals or industries that you were kicking around in your mind, or did you always kind of have your eye on this commercial landscaping?
Yeah, so I approached it from more of a market dynamic perspective.
Sure.
So I looked at, what are the key things that are important to me? So as I mentioned, fragmentation, kind of GDP level growth, limited cyclicality, limited kind of volatility. So even in a downturn, what happens to revenue, right? People still have to maintain their lawns.
Yeah. Your market isn't controlling you, weather isn't controlling you,
Right,
all those things.
right.
You want the most consistency.
Yeah, and so that was a framework that I kind of initially developed, and then I applied that to the business services space because I just felt like, from a blue collar business perspective, that was probably the best and most capital efficient way of
Definitely the
doing
best
this.
Customers. Your,
Yeah.
your business customers are always going to be more valuable than your consumer customers.
Yeah, totally. And and there's just, again, like the whole small business landscape lends itself really well to business services, to plumbing, HVAC, commercial landscaping, all of these things, right? There's a lot of these kind of mom and pop businesses out there, and that's kind of, again, part of the this idea that I had. And so anyway, when I initially did this or started this process, I actually was looking more on the HVAC side of things.
Oh, really?
When I worked at that private equity fund, we had looked at a couple of HVAC companies. I was always like really drawn to those businesses. They're really intriguing. Again, for those market reasons that I mentioned. And what I came to find out, though, is that in the state of Georgia, you basically can't own a business like that if you aren't licensed in it. And so, there's
You
some
didn't want to
ways
go to
around
HVAC school.
Right, exactly. There are some ways around it, but basically the lenders I spoke with all kind of said there's no way that they would ever be able to provide, loans to someone who doesn't have a license, because if your key employee leaves, like all of a sudden you can't
you
work
have to
until
be
you hire someone
responsible
else.
to doing some
100%,
portion of the work.
So that kind of shut that down really quickly. And so then I kind of went back to the drawing board and said, all right, these are the market dynamics that are important to me. What other industries have these? There's a few other things that popped up. And then a gentleman that I was working with as kind of a buy-side, search guy. So basically what he did was he would try to find businesses that he thought fit my kind of scope, and then he would send them to me.
Bird dogging your businesses.
Yeah, and so and then if I acquired one of the businesses that he sent me, I paid a success fee basically. But so he kind of helped me look for these things because I was still living in New York at the time, and he called me in February just as I was about to move here, and he said, have this business. It's commercial landscaping. I'm not sure if you would be interested in that. And at first, I kind of I think wrote it off without really knowing much about landscaping, and then I read some industry reports, dug into it a little bit, and was like, wow, this actually hits a lot of those same framework points that I had mentioned. And so, it's worth learning more. And so I had some calls with the owner or prior owner rather. And every time basically I continued to learn more about the business, I was more and more intrigued, and it just kept checking a lot of these boxes. And so, that's ultimately kind of how I ended up on it.
Sure. Well, that's exciting. Have you ever thought about like franchising? Are you gonna try to build this? If you put enough structure into any business, I've learned that if you can create that business in a box where people look at it and say, "Hey, I understand the road to how this is going to be successful." If you can take the, having to understand what your EBITDA even means out of these person's hands, a lot of people will buy your business model and try to replicate it. Have you ever thought about being in that franchisor situation?
I mean, not really. I would say, like, I know it exists in the commercial landscaping space, limitedly. There are, if you look at the biggest players in the space, they're not franchises. The biggest
yeah, for sure. There's definitely less than 10 of those players that do it well.
Yeah. I think that, I could certainly understand the value of having kind of the back office side of things provided for you, right? So you have that, as you said, that structure is kind
Maybe it's just building a software. Just building a tool.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, what I've found though is like probably the most difficult aspect isn't the software or the tools. It's much more on the customer relationship side
Oh,
of things.
sure. Yeah, yeah. As
And
far as
so,
business goes,
you know,
value wise, 100% to
yeah,
a franchisee.
yeah. So I mean, I think if I was someone that was approaching it and was thinking, oh, maybe I would, buy into a franchise. I'm not sure how immediately helpful just being provided like the marketing and
Hmm.
the financial tools and all that is. Like I think the biggest thing is, having someone help you create that initial kind of book of business, those initial
Sure.
customer relationships. So, it's an interesting thought. I mean, I'd certainly, would consider it down the road, but I think right now, our focus is just kind of expanding with existing customers,
Sure.
adding new ones in the right areas, and then finding businesses to acquire.
Sure. Yeah, well that we do that a lot is helping different industries develop a tool for their industry. Like we have some friends of ours in specific industries that have said, "Hey, I don't have the perfect tool for my company."
Yeah.
We help them build that tool. The value for us obviously is the integrated credit card processing. Anybody that uses that tool gets to use us as credit card processing, which is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've helped a lot with that. There's definitely some ways to make your company very valuable in that space there. But you're absolutely right. Is just what is the value? Something interesting as well is that probably all of the top five landscape style CRMs, so like industry specific pieces of software to help you manage your commercial or residential landscaping company, are owned by credit card processors
Oh, that's interesting.
because they love those clients. We love landscaping clients,
Yeah.
and they stick around, especially when you're in the South.
Yeah.
When you have that piece of technology that ties you to them, it's really, really awesome. You get to kind of determine your rate when they set up the software instead of haggling your rate every year with the same company. So there's definitely some value to the credit card processing side of things, of developing pieces of technology that make your company more valuable. So that's why I always kind of kick those things around, man. But that's pretty interesting, whether it's franchising or continuing to grow just inherently with the customer relationships you have until you're an empire. I think that you guys are on the right track. What would would teaching some of this stuff or taking on some mentees in the future, is that kind of something that would interest you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always interested. There's some online kind of communities for people that
Sure.
what they call, like, one is called Search Funder, right? And it's about like it's basically a community of people that are all kind of coming from different industries looking to acquire businesses in the small business space for the most part. And it's always fun for me to talk to people, and not just about like the process that I've gone through, but one of the things that excited me about private equity was the opportunity to review and examine a bunch of different companies. So every day you'd come to work, and here today would be like a telematics business that I'm reviewing, and then here's an aerospace business. So anyway, it's fun to like chat with people that are in the process now of acquiring their own small businesses, and they're interested in someone else's perspective. And I love to kind of kick around, ideas and diligence topics, and just thought provoking things
Sure.
with people. So yeah, I'm always always happy to chat with people.
Well, that's interesting. Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll have some people with some questions on here one day. I'd love to have this kind of Q&A thing where people that have real questions as entrepreneurs can come ask some of the people that we trust to give them some good advice. So maybe we'll try to do that. I just got a couple more questions for you, and then we'll get out of here. How do we find you if we want to do some business with you, send you a referral, ask you a question? What is the way that we get in touch with you or your company?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the two easiest ways, first and foremost, would be our website, georgiascapes.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Adrian Pinto. You'll see that Georgia Scapes tied to that. I'm on Twitter, Adrian_Pinto too. But yeah, I would say our website and LinkedIn is probably the easiest ways.
Sure. Sure. And as you see, our podcast is called Burn the Ship. So Burn the Ship is an allusion to Spanish conquistadors landing on the coast of Mexico and burning all their ships because they were forced to figure it out where they had landed and leave no option in their mind for going back. What has it been like these 5 months since you've kind of burned your ship, moved to Atlanta, committed
Yeah.
to your business, learned so much about your industry, and kind of started to pave that way for yourself forward? How would you sum that up for the people that are thinking about making that same jump themselves? It's December. My New Year's resolution in
Yeah.
January is I'm really gonna go hard at trying to acquire this business in the first quarter. What would you tell those people that are kind of on the fence about it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say two things. I mean, interesting to the analogy that you used. I mean, certainly there were times, in the first week or two where, I mean, I remember thinking like, what did I get myself into? You know what I mean? Like I was just like 2 months ago, I was living in New York, and, I was working at one of the Wall Street banks, and, I was wearing suits to work and all this stuff, and not during COVID, but And then all of a sudden it's like completely flipped on its head. And here I am, living in Georgia, and, my office is in kind of just a little bit in rural Georgia. And so anyway, it was definitely a big change where I, had to kind of like level set a little
Sure.
bit. This is, kind of what did I get myself into? But I think what I would say is that, firstly, you definitely have to be fully committed. My wife and I moved here. There's no turning back type of thing. And I think when you have that, when both your feet in the water, if you will, like, you're not going to kind of like retreat and kind of give up on it. I knew immediately, I was like, I got to figure this out, right? Like I'm not going back to New York. Like, I bought this business. There's now a company of people that, again, kind of depend on me to figure this out. So I think having that extra motivation, not wanting to let people down, both like my family, but also the people that work for Georgia Scapes. That to me was kind of an added way to put some pressure on me and make sure that I figure it out. And then, I think the other thing is just like, ask a million questions. This is kind of in any job, but even more so here where you
overly willing to learn.
Yeah. When you're the owner, like you can't not know your business. And so, I, had to tell people and remind them a million times, like, listen, I'm going to ask a lot of annoying questions because I don't know the basics, And so it's like, I'm sorry if these seem really stupid, and I promise that I will remember your answers and not ask them again. But like, please explain to me like the most basic things. And so, I think what I would say is like, don't be intimidated by the fact that you don't know an industry as a reason to not necessarily pursue something. Like if you are drawn to whether it's small business acquisition or startups or whatever it is, like, you can kind of figure it out and become an expert. Now, if you were to try to acquire like a super complicated aerospace and manufacturing company, like that's going to be a little more challenging, right?
You might want to do a little bit of your homework.
Yeah, for sure. But I I knew that going into it, and I specifically picked a business that I thought would be not necessarily simple, but more easily figured out. And so basically just feel free, ask questions and make sure that you're teaming up with a group of people that are going to be capable of like helping you along, because you're going to need that help, especially early on.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're definitely going to need help. It absolutely, two things I've said over and over again on the podcast is that it absolutely takes a village, and that you don't know what you don't know. You know, when you're jumping into business, is that some of the best, healthiest pressure you'll ever get put on you in your life comes from the beginning days of owning a business. So be thankful for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm fortunate from a personal standpoint where it's like I don't have kids yet. It's like it allowed me to like fully immerse myself during this period, which I could certainly understand it being even more challenging.
How old are you?
I'm 30.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, you're into it early. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You're into it really early. Well, this is cool, man. This has been an awesome conversation. I appreciate kind of your insight about it. If you want to leave our audience with anything, go ahead. But I think that you've really helped steer a lot of entrepreneurs that don't really understand where they're going on their first step into business. You've kind of explained to them that first step isn't so scary. It's the fear of the unknown that drives a lot of our decisions in life. And, once you kind of kick that door open and see what's behind the door, there's not as much to be scared of. So I think just that message in itself has been incredibly powerful. But if you have anything you want to leave our audience with, go ahead, let them know.
Yeah, no, I would just say this has been great. Thanks for having me. And to the point that you just made, I think that it can be intimidating. And I think for me, when I initially had this idea, I didn't realize how plausible it was. It's like the idea of like, oh yeah, acquiring a company. It's like, okay, like how are you going to do that? And there's so many resources out there, both in terms of explaining how to do this, right? Whether it's online tools, whether it's a lot of the big business schools have like white papers that they've published that explain a lot of this. Stanford and Harvard have really good ones. But so, not only is it possible, but then there's also really good financial tools out there that make it, possible, right? And so an example is the SBA 7A loan that exists, which is basically the government facilitating the transfer of wealth from baby boomers to our generation. And these are tools that exist so people who are young and capable can go out and buy businesses. So
and take that first step without fearing for their life.
Yeah, exactly. So do your research, but it's out there.
100%. Yeah, and it's easy to find.
Yeah.
If you go look hard enough, you'll find it. So well, I appreciate you coming on, my friend. You've been a wealth of information. I hope to have you back.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Problem. Cool. Burn the ship.